Andriy Shkvarko, moving on to another significant topic that concerns the International Olympic Committee and their lack of resolve, as well as their policy of persistent double standards. It became known just a few minutes ago that our skeleton athlete, Vladyslav Heraskevych, was disqualified before the first run of the 2026 Olympics in skeleton. This was reported by Suspilne. We are still waiting for the official position of the National Olympic Committee regarding this matter. Let me remind you, he was forbidden to compete with a helmet that had photos of fallen Ukrainian athletes. He ignored the ban during training and went out anyway. In fact, as an argument, he cited examples of an American athlete who paid tribute to his family. An Italian athlete had a helmet with various flags, including that of the Russian Federation. But here, for some reason, it's considered political, even though there's really nothing political about it. Well, as they say, when it comes to the IOC, there's nothing you can do about it. Nothing you can do about the International Olympic Committee. Or maybe, after all, it's worth doing everything possible. Right now, I'm trying to find the right, appropriate, on-air word to put the International Olympic Committee in its place so that there would be a single standard, so that it would finally change, taking into account today's realities, because the Olympics are supposed to mean peace everywhere, no war anywhere. Hostilities are supposed to stop, but that's not how it works. Hostilities are ongoing. Russia continues them, it continues them. She sneezed at it, and the International Olympic Committee doesn't give a damn about it. I didn't see any comments from the IOC regarding the Russian flags that appeared. Egyptian.
Well, what do you say?
And the helmet, any comments?
Unfortunately, the politics of hybrid warfare, the Gerasimov doctrine, it works. It works. It's just that when the world unites around Ukraine and Ukraine becomes the core of values... No, honestly, let's be frank, neither the States nor Europe are the standard of values for us anymore. We are the example of values for them. Well, for now. And when we see that, in principle, everyone has consolidated, united, and put pressure on the Russian Federation to make it end the war. Well, and Trump, remember, he declared this: peace through strength. That's not our phrase, yours or mine. It's his phrase from his election campaign after he won the elections in the United States of America. But then, as they say, something went wrong, right? And the IOC, in my opinion, is no longer a symptom, it's a consequence. Undoubtedly, if we talk about a specific fact, Ukraine now needs to show the toughest possible response in order to demonstrate, well, to restore this value system of the world. And that sport should bring peace. Well, that's its main purpose, right? So that there are no wars and specific countries can resolve their issues with each other within the framework of sports in its various disciplines. That's the whole point of the Olympic Committee, after all, not to essentially play along with the aggression of the Russian Federation, especially when they do such rather inappropriate things. But again, when Europe tries to establish contact with Putin, when Macron tries to reach out to the president of the Russian Federation, as do a number of other European leaders, when that same legitimizing meeting in Anchorage takes place, you remember, right, the one the Russians now talk about almost every day, when in some way Russia is partially brought out of isolation, and accordingly, so is Putin himself. Then this metastasis starts to spread everywhere. It spreads to culture, it spreads to cinema, it spreads to language, and it spreads to sports and to the economy, by the way, which was discussed at the Davos Economic Forum. This whole narrative that things are not so clear-cut is slowly creeping back into the international context. And slowly, when even in football they start letting Russians back in and somewhere block similar, undoubtedly correct initiatives by Ukrainian athletes, all this shows that Russia is acting correctly within its own doctrine, you have to admit. And this will further push them to violate international law and to continue battering the architecture of global security. Well, if it can't defend itself, as we see in specific initiatives of the Olympic Committee, then what? Then it needs to be further humiliated. That's all there is to it. So unfortunately, right now, it seems to me that this is in the hands of the IOC, right? The Olympic Committee
has officially confirmed that Ukrainian skeleton athlete Vladyslav Heraskevych was not allowed to participate in the Olympics. They say he refused to comply with the IOC's recommendations regarding self-expression.
Well, everyone wants money. Let's be honest.
So what? Should we bring them a suitcase, damn it, full of cash? Or what?
Me? No way. Absolutely not. Under no circumstances. I'm just saying that apparently the Russians must have promised them something. It's the same story as with FIFA, when, remember, they were drinking champagne with Putin, making deals about letting Russian clubs back in and so on and so forth. Helping out, it's a regular story with Russian funding with the Red Cross. Have we forgotten the story with the Red Cross? They also constantly look into the pocket of the Russian Federation. And it's the same with everyone. When Europe realizes that now it has to pay for its own security. Listen, why go far, my friend? And Guterres, the UN Secretary General, says that the UN will soon be on the verge of bankruptcy and that they are now going to cut their own expenses by about 20.
Only 5%. Wait, what? Really?
What?
Secretary General. You meant NATO Secretary General?
Sorry.
UN SecGen.
No, of course. The Secretary General of the United Nations, after his speech about how no one reads UN resolutions. Now he has come out with the next speech saying that they are facing major financial problems and countries don't want to pay their contributions. So why don't countries want to pay their contributions? Because they don't see integrity, they don't see strength in the world's largest and most powerful supranational institution. Well, obviously, if the rules don't work, if everyone ignores international law, if they're just a declarative institution, then of course countries will choose a more concrete direction for their money. And what is that concrete direction? That's right, militarization. According to data from 2025, military production in the world has increased by about 30%. And this is a clear indicator that neither the UN as an institution is working, nor is the overall architecture of global security effective at all. Because if the parties are betting on weapons, on nuclear weapons, then, something definitely needs to change. And this, yes, as I said earlier, is not a symptom of the IOC decision, it's already a consequence. Well, and undoubtedly, Ukraine's response, I repeat once again, must be as decisive and concrete as possible and perhaps even radical, so that for the Olympic Committee, well, such inappropriate decisions become a cold shower.
But here, for now, we're alone in this battlefield. It seems to me that in such actions...
Early in the war, Ukraine was not alone in the fight. Oops.
I mean that now we need to look for allies within the framework of the Olympics.
Sort of. Trump says we should be endlessly grateful. We, Europe, we thank everyone who helps us 100 times over. And truly, without the support of our partners, nothing would have been possible. But at the beginning of the war, I was here, and you were here. I am deeply convinced of that. And we all remember how, for the first few months, we ensured our own defense capability. We were alone. Do you remember what Zelensky asked Biden for? Yes, the then president of the United States? He asked for Stingers and Javelins. And in December, before the start of the full-scale invasion, remember, Biden urged us to wage a partisan war. Maybe someone forgot? Let me remind you, that was his official speech. So, unfortunately, Ukraine is used to, well, setting an example for others and doing so with its determination. Now, above all, we really need to respond ourselves without looking back at anyone else. Not to Brussels, not to Washington, not to those who are now showing a policy of double standards. Unfortunately...
Mr. Oleksii, thank you for joining us. Oleksii Buriachenko is here with us in the studio. He is a professor at the Kyiv Aviation Institute and the president of the International Institute for Security Studies. He was a guest...
Latvian TV channels will broadcast advertisements during the performances of Russian and Belarusian athletes at the Olympic Games in Milan. Although they are competing without national symbols, once again, athletes with pro-war views have made it to the Olympics. Neither this year's Olympics nor many previous ones have stopped the Russians from continuing the war, even though the Games are traditionally considered a time for peace. The Olympic Games in Milan are already the fifth in which Russians are not participating under their national flag. This year, 20 athletes from the aggressor country and its accomplice Belarus will compete under a neutral flag. However, according to investigators from the company Molfar, at least 4 Russian participants have direct ties to supporting the war against Ukraine. In particular, there is evidence of training on occupied territories and open anti-Ukrainian propaganda on their social media.
The athletes support the war online, liking and reposting posts, but for some reason this is not considered a sign of supporting the war. I also don't understand how an athlete who is fully funded by a government engaged in propaganda can be considered neutral.
Russians and Belarusians were suspended from competitions after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. However, they reappeared on the international sports stage at the Summer Games in Paris in 2024. On the eve of the event, the International Olympic Committee allowed them to participate on the condition that they would not display any national symbols. However, even there were Russians who definitely did not protest against the Kremlin's aggression. Nevertheless, Olympic officials keep repeating the mantra that sports are outside of politics.
We are a sports organization, we are outside of politics, but we are not isolated from the world. Our task is to provide a neutral platform for competition, where sport remains the main priority and every participant can compete freely.
This is how freely Russia destroyed civilian infrastructure in Ukraine with missiles and drones, while dancers at the Olympic opening ceremony were depicting the dove of peace. In ancient Greece, wars would stop during the Olympics. For Russia, however, the competition is clearly just a cover. Russia invaded Georgia on the very first day of the 2008 Beijing Olympics. The annexation of Crimea began during the Sochi Winter Olympics. In February 2022, Putin went to Beijing to sign a gas deal with Xi Jinping. 4 days later, when the Olympics ended, he attacked Ukraine. All of this is in the best Soviet traditions. In the 80s, Moscow refused to withdraw its troops from Afghanistan despite the boycott.
I informed the International Olympic Committee that due to Soviet occupation forces in Afghanistan, the American people and I oppose sending the Olympic team to Moscow.
Neither the Olympics nor the boycott nor neutral status prevent the Russians from staging provocations during the Games. A few days before the start of the competitions in Milan, the local Minister of Foreign Affairs stated that the National Cybersecurity Agency had repelled an attack specifically by Russian hackers. And during the Games in Paris in 2024, Russian influence groups on the internet spread fake news criticizing President Macron and allegedly warned about the threat of outbreaks of violence. Putin went even further, attempting to create an alternative to the Olympics. First, there were the so-called BRICS Games in Kazan in 2024, which foreign participants simply did not attend. The Russians competed among themselves, surrounded by hired crowds. The dictator's next idea, the World Friendship Games, also failed. The international community did not want to be friends, and the IOC strongly condemned these competitions. Not a single world federation recognized them, leaving Russia in sporting isolation. Katerina Yelisyeva, Podrobici, Inter TV channel, United News Marathon.